Hi, Dave. My name is Felicia. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you today. For those who don't know Dave, he's a California senator in District 3 in San Jose, Milpitas, Sunnyvale. Am I correct? My
Super.
intern, I got a bunch of high school interns and college interns who do my research, and I caught a couple of slips. So I just want to make sure that they're giving me the right information about you. Excited to have you here to share with us your thoughts on our industry, the movement, what we need to do to be better, what we can do collectively to serve one another. My first question to you is, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then also I'd love to know, when was that pivotal moment when you decided to become a proponent of cannabis?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. And as far as the introduction goes, just to make a slight correction, although I love the title senator because I'm running for state senate in Senate District 15 to succeed Jim Bell, I'm a county supervisor currently in Silicon Valley in Santa Clara County and have been since 2008. So that goes back a while, right, to the first big Obama election. So 11 and a half years now. And I've had the opportunity on the Board of Supervisors, to weigh in to cast some significant votes. Unfortunately, not significant enough because I've been outvoted, 3-2 by a majority of the board a couple of times on commercialization of agricultural production and so forth. But when did I first, become a proponent? I'm not absolutely clear on when that was, but I served on the San Jose City Council for 8 years prior to the Board of Supervisors, going back to the 2000 election cycle. I was vice mayor there for a couple of years. At that time, we did not have a lot of significant votes on cannabis that I can recall. Remember, it was in that era that medicinal marijuana was, first becoming sort of institutionalized with public health cards being issued by the counties, and I wasn't over at the county yet. But those were the early days. I'd have to say, really, my roots in terms, no pun intended, in terms of the issue, really go back to many, many years ago when I was doing private criminal defense. And, I went, worked my way through law school at night while I was raising a family and running a real estate business. And when I got done with that, I was expecting to practice only on the transactional real estate side. And I ended up right out of the gate having folks come to me and ask me for help with criminal defense. And I got drawn into that for about 6 consecutive years, working at it almost full time. And one of the most interesting experiences I had back then was actually on a civil case. I had to go into San Quentin State Prison to take the deposition of a witness who was there and was serving a 7-year sentence for possession of marijuana. And I was in there with about 3 other attorneys on both sides of the case. One of them had done a lot of criminal defense, more than I had at that time. Again, this was a civil case. We paused the court reporter. We all stopped, went off the record and said, "How did this happen to you?" And he said, "Well, I was guilty. And so I pled guilty." And we said, "Well, what did your legal counsel tell you to do? Was that the advice? It seems like you could have pled down or maybe had it reduced to a misdemeanor, and the amount of possession of the quantity, even though it was a second or third offense, was very minimal." And he said, "Oh, I didn't." He said, "I waived counsel." He said, "I was guilty, so, why use a public defender?" And we were just aghast at that. And then one of the other attorneys who did a lot of criminal defense work and happened to be involved in that same case told us before we went back on the record, a majority of those sentenced here are in here for drug charges, quote unquote. Most of them cannabis, marijuana, and almost all of them, in my humble opinion, came in, without really effective legal assistance. So we still have those issues out there. As you know, people are still trying to get convictions expunged, even though it should happen almost automatically now, especially after Prop 64. So that's a long answer to when did I first get started. Back, by the way, the year I'm talking about is not 2000 or 2008. I was doing criminal defense work in the mid 1990s. So, you know, I have a long history of empathy with folks who are have really gone through the legal ringer and ended up, you know, with a target on their backs or probation or whatever for basically doing something that was probably self-medication at the time.
Well said. Well said. Especially as a person who is the Southern California coordinator for National Expungement Week. We're going to be working on all kinds of anything that can be expunged legally in California. So some of the Prop 47, but the fact that I'm having to do this and that we're having to do this across the nation, and individuals who have the ability to wave magic fingers and press buttons aren't automating this for us is challenging for me. So I thank you for definitely sharing that with all of us. As somebody who's been around for a while and has an understanding of probably the plant and the consumers and all of these things in particular, what do you envision for us in the cannabis industry?
Well, I think, you know, like most things in the, you know, history of this country, commercialization is important because the laws tend to and the politics tend to follow the money. And I don't mean that necessarily in the sense of campaign contributions or, you know, any of that stuff like political cleanup. What I'm talking about is, you know, let's face it, we're in a democracy, but we're also in, you know, one of the most successful capitalistic economies the last 200 plus years in the history of the world. And going back to our founding fathers who, you know, many of whom were tobacco growers, you can really look at how the documents that created this country were built around the commercialization of substances, frankly, that were more dangerous by any measure and lethal by any measure compared to you know, the positive impacts that cannabis use can have when utilized properly. The really appropriate, I like the, you know, sort of the Prop 64 language of the responsible use, recreational use of marijuana. But, you know, we're trying to preserve about 12,000 agricultural acres in what we call South County. People call Coyote Valley. People, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if folks outside of our county didn't realize that we still have 15,000 agricultural workers in Santa Clara County. We're trying to do like a lot of people are in this, you know, new climate aware sort of economy that we're moving into, is just to keep agriculture local, to go farm to table wherever possible. That'll help us in so many ways, even cutting down on vehicle miles traveled and things like that. But how do you do that when you're in Silicon Valley? The cost of living, even for farmers here, is high. The cost of water is enormous compared to the Central Valley. What I've been trying to promote at the Board of Supervisors level is, let's allow commercialization. If people are wary of it, minimize it to, you know, 10 acres out of every 100. It's enough for some farmers who are growing bell peppers, cucumbers, other crops, row crops, to get themselves a boost on an agricultural product that has high commodity value, legalizes it, gets it out of illegal grows in the hills surrounding Silicon Valley, which has been an enormous kind of criminal epidemic problem, and let's just do it right. And you know, I was amazed, as progressive as our county tends to be on so many issues, national leaders on so many issues that are kind of cutting edge, that San Benito County, our rural county to the south, which tends to be much more conservative generally in population, legalized you know, commercial grows before we did. We still haven't done it in Santa Clara County, and I won't dive into all of the arguments pro and con that we've heard in our county. Some of them are legit relative to the health and hospital system that we run, and fear of federal retribution, especially under this president. We don't want to lose any of our $1 billion in federal aid that comes into our hospital system for allowing the commercial grows of a controlled substance, but a federally controlled substance. So there's some concerns that are legit, but I just don't like the lack of preparation for the opening of those markets. I think we should be ready to go at a minimum, and I'd like to be more bold than that.
That was a mouthful. Thank you for all of that in particular. And I think it might be a perfect segue, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jacqueline Hernandez, but there's a question from the audience about taxes, and specific to California in particular, but when are taxes going to stop growing and start being, I wouldn't say regulated appropriately, but I think the question is more of, when are the tax rates for the industry? When are we going to start seeing those numbers drop?
Well, we need to get on that. I actually have brought forward an initiative in Santa Clara County that was agreed on so far by a majority of the board to dramatically reduce or drop the fees that we charge for medicinal cards through our public health department. There's a $100 fee for that on top of the taxes that are already that are already being paid by folks. I want to work on that at the state level. I do think that early on, maybe there was an appropriate inducement for government, even for cities, to allow retail and dispensaries on the basis that they can get some revenue out of it. Maybe that was a good icebreaker at the time, but I think we need to go back and recognize the fact that, the stereotype, which probably came from my generation as much as the current younger generation, that cannabis is all about recreational use and nothing but recreational use and so forth, is wrong. Most of the folks that I know that are appealing to me to reduce the cost of doing business around cannabis are older adults who need cannabis for medicinal purposes. And there is no other medicine that's taxed like cannabis is, as if it's contraband or some, dangerous substance. It's not tobacco. It's not something that we should be trying to eradicate with taxes. It's something that we should be figuring out how to embrace so that the good residents of the state of California who need it, and the doctors who prescribe it, are not looking at barriers, artificial barriers to the cost of it. And back to older adults, who can least afford those taxes? People on fixed incomes. And I think we need to be sensitive to it. We need to turn the page on over taxation. And again, at some level, that's going to help the growth of commercialization of hemp as well.
I wanted to jump in for a second, Dave. I mean, are elected officials looking at the industry as one of the few revenue sources? And really, can we expect them to even come close to lowering our taxes to compete with the illicit market?
Well, anyone who has a business background, and I do, as I mentioned earlier, not just a legal background, but I grew up in an agricultural environment here in the orchard farming days of this valley. That's what my family did. My grandfather was an immigrant farmer here who had mentored me and brought me up in that environment. And then I went on to involvement, in commercial activities as the valley transformed from agriculture into a more commercial Silicon Valley as we have now. And I think one thing I understand is that, over taxation doesn't necessarily get you the tax revenue production that you're looking for. It makes a lot more sense to me to open up the marketplace and to use if any tax at all, an appropriate modest measure of taxes to cover cost recovery, and leave it at that. Don't to use it to put a premium on it to try to make up for what other lost revenue at state or local government right now would be a mistake, because it's what every chamber of commerce argues in the first place. Once you do that, it's actually a job killer, a production killer. In a sense, you're shooting yourself in the foot. Instead of getting 100% of the market, you're going to get 10% of of the market because it's overly taxed. That's the way I'll be looking at it, and hopefully I can persuade others.
Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for joining us. We appreciate you, Dave. Have a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you. We appreciate you too, and keep up the good fight, especially on those expungements. That's justice served when we finish getting that job done. And I'm sorry so much that burden is falling upon all of you. It should be happening, more naturally through governmental processes, but we'll work on that as well. Thank you very much.